I stood outside the glowing ballroom, my hands tugging nervously at the hem of my faded dress. The music inside spilled into the night, laughter, clinking glasses, and the easy chatter of people who had never once worried about the price of bread. My son's voice rose above it all, confident and sharp, a voice I had once loved to hear. But that night, it wasn't filled with love. Through the golden doors, I could hear him boasting to his friends, talking about how he had made it, how he had climbed into the circles of wealth and influence. And then, like a knife slipping between my ribs, I heard him mention me. Not with pride, not with gratitude, but with ridicule. My mother, he laughed. She still wears the same old rags she's worn for years. You'd think she was living under a bridge the way she dresses. Honestly, I'd rather she just stayed home than embarrass me at events like this. The room erupted in laughter. My son, my only child, the boy I once carried on my back through rainstorms so his shoes wouldn't get wet, was laughing at me in front of strangers. I stood frozen, every word echoing through me. My old dress suddenly felt heavier, as if it carried every sacrifice I had ever made. Every meal I skipped so he could eat. Every coat I patched so he would stay warm. Every coin I stretched until it tore. I had worn my struggles with pride, because they meant my son could stand taller than I ever could. And yet, here he was, mocking me for the very scars of my love. For a moment, shame threatened to drown me. I thought of turning away, disappearing into the night, letting his cruel laughter define me. But something inside me shifted. A steadiness, a fire I had almost forgotten. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed the wrinkles of my dress, and stepped forward. My heart beat hard, not with humiliation, but with anticipation. He thought he knew who I was, a poor, tired woman in worn-out clothes. If only he knew what I carried with me that night. Long before that glittering party, long before my son's laughter turned cruel, there was a different story. A story of worn hands, sleepless nights, and sacrifices too small for the world to notice, but too heavy for a single woman to carry alone. I still remember the first winter after his father left. The house was cold, the pipes rattled like bones in the night, and all we had for warmth was an old space heater and each other. I worked double shifts at the diner, scrubbing dishes until my fingertips cracked, then hurried home just in time to press his clothes for school. They weren't new clothes, but I patched them so carefully you could hardly see the holes. Every dollar I earned had a name: rent, bread, his school fees. Sometimes there wasn't enough left for me. I would set a plate in front of him, smiling, pretending I wasn't hungry, while my own stomach twisted in silence. He was just a boy. I didn't want him to see the cost of his full belly. When he brought home his first A paper from school, I tucked it into a little box where I kept all his small victories. That box was my treasure chest, proof that the sacrifices were worth it. I remember walking home one rainy night, my shoes soaked through, and finding him asleep at the kitchen table. His head rested on his homework, and a candle burned low beside him. I bent down, brushed his damp curls from his forehead, and whispered, "One day, all this will be for you. You'll never have to fight the way I did." And in those days, he adored me for it. He used to tell his teachers, "My mom is the strongest person I know." He would hug me tight after school and promise, "One day, Mama, I'll take care of you." I believed him, so I kept going. I skipped buying new shoes so he could have the sneakers his friends wore. I sewed dresses for myself from fabric scraps just to afford him a proper winter coat. I went without time and time again because I thought, isn't that what mothers do? But somewhere along the way, as he grew older, and the world began to notice his charm, his intelligence, his potential, he stopped seeing me as his foundation. The love in his eyes dimmed, replaced with something colder, sharper. And that little boy who once bragged about his strong mother? He forgot. I gave him everything, but soon he would take everything for granted. The change didn't happen overnight. It was slow, almost invisible at first, like a shadow creeping across the floor until suddenly you're sitting in darkness and can't remember when the light began to fade. At first, He was just busy. Important meetings, late nights at work, new friends from polished families who invited him into their glittering world. I told myself it was natural, a young man spreading his wings, stepping into the future I had worked so hard to give him. But soon, I began to notice the small things. The way his voice cooled when I called, how his visits grew shorter, his hugs more distant. When I asked if I could come see him at one of his company dinners, he hesitated, then said, "It's probably not the kind of place you'd feel comfortable, Mom." Those words stung more than I let him see. I smiled, nodded, told him I understood. But inside something trembled. Because what he really meant was, "You don't belong there." It became more obvious with time. He stopped bringing me along to his gatherings. Once, when I surprised him by showing up at his office with a home-cooked meal, his assistant gave me a confused smile, as though she'd never even heard of me. He hadn't mentioned me to them at all. I remember the day I overheard him on the phone. He thought I was in the other room. His friend must have asked about me because I heard him laugh, low and embarrassed. "My mom? She's simple. She still dresses like she shops at thrift stores. I try not to bring her around much." I stood frozen, holding a basket of freshly folded laundry, my knuckles white against the fabric. I wanted to burst into the room, to remind him of the nights I sewed those thrift store clothes so he wouldn't go cold. But instead, I stayed silent. My tears fell quietly onto the cotton shirts I had folded for him. That was when I realized something. My son wasn't ashamed of my love or my sacrifices. He was ashamed of the very woman who gave him everything. The distance grew into a chasm. He began to talk about investments, expensive cars, luxury trips I couldn't even pronounce. When I tried to share stories of my past, the life before his success, he grew restless, impatient, his eyes flicking to his watch. One evening, he said it out loud. The words I had feared. "Mom, maybe you shouldn't come to the next event. People, they don't really understand your kind of style. It might be better if you just stayed home." He said it kindly, as though he was protecting me. But kindness can cut deeper than cruelty when it carries shame beneath it. I nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and smiled as though it didn't matter. But inside, a storm began to rise. He thought my worth was measured in fabric, but soon, I'd measure it in millions. The ballroom glowed with golden chandeliers, laughter swirling in the air like champagne bubbles. I lingered by the door, my dress plain, my shoes worn, yet my posture steady. I had been invited, reluctantly, but my son never expected me to show up. I watched him from the edge of the crowd. He was at the center of it all, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women draped in jewels that sparkled under the light. He laughed easily, his glass raised, his arm resting casually on the back of a chair. To them, he was the image of success. To me, he was still the boy who once begged me not to leave his bedside when thunder shook the house. But the boy I knew was gone. I heard it again, my name on his lips. Or rather, the idea of me. "Can you believe she came dressed like that?" He chuckled to his friends, tilting his head toward me. He didn't think I could hear. "She's been wearing the same old clothes for years. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if she's allergic to shopping." I told her this was a formal party, but, "Well, that's my mom for you." The laughter erupted, cruel and careless. One of the women leaned in, smirking. "She looks like she wandered in from a church basement dinner." My son didn't defend me. He laughed louder. The words pierced me, sharper than any blade. I stood frozen, every memory of sacrifice flooding my chest. The nights I skipped meals, the years I wore patched-up dresses so he could wear new shoes, the quiet tears I wiped away alone. And now, those same sacrifices had become a joke for his amusement, but I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. Instead, I listened. I let the mockery echo, let it stretch until the very walls seemed to vibrate with their laughter. Because something inside me whispered, the higher they laugh, the harder they'll fall. I glanced around the room. His friends, his colleagues, the very people he sought to impress. They were watching me, too. Their eyes flicked between my worn dress and his polished suit. They believed his story. that I was small, unworthy, a woman of no significance, and that belief would make what came next all the more powerful. I held my chin high, as though their words slid right past me, and walked deeper into the room. The laughter softened as people noticed me moving forward. My son's smile faltered just for a moment, uncertainty flickering across his face. I didn't stop at his table. I didn't speak a word. I simply let the silence follow me as I crossed the ballroom, carrying the weight of secrets he had never imagined. He didn't know that night was the stage for my grand reveal. He thought he knew me. To him, I was just a poor, simple woman in worn-out clothes, clinging to memories of the past. But what he never understood was that while I appeared to live small, my world was far larger than he could imagine. The truth began years earlier, in the quiet moments when no one was watching. I had learned early that money slipped away as quickly as water through fingers, unless you taught yourself how to hold it. Every tip I made at the diner, every extra shift, every crumpled dollar I tucked into my apron, I saved it. Not for luxuries, not even for myself, but for something bigger. Back then, the town was growing, little by little. People said land on the outskirts wasn't worth anything. Too far from the city, too quiet, too wild. But I had a different vision. With my modest savings, I bought one small plot. Just dirt and weeds to everyone else, but to me, it was possibility. Over the years, I bought another, then another. Slowly, silently, the patches of earth began to form something valuable. And while my son believed I was scraping by, I was also learning. Reading books on finance at night by the dim light of a lamp, asking questions at the bank, watching how people invested. Knowledge became my secret weapon. I didn't dress the part of wealth. I didn't need to. I started a small business too, a catering service run quietly with 2 other women from the neighborhood. We worked hard, built a reputation, and though the profits weren't glamorous, they were steady. I never flaunted it, never even told my son. Why? Because I wanted him to grow with humility, to know love mattered more than luxury. But life is ironic. The very humility I lived by made him assume I had nothing at all. Year by year, the land grew in value. Developers came knocking. That worthless dirt became the soil for shopping centers, housing developments, even a business park. By the time my son was sipping cocktails with his polished friends, I was signing contracts worth millions. And not just money. Influence, connections, respect in circles he couldn't even imagine. And yet, I never changed my clothes. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. My value wasn't stitched into fabric. My strength wasn't measured in gold necklaces or luxury handbags. He thought he had outgrown me, but in truth, I had quietly built a future so strong it could have carried us both. That night at the party, as I listened to his laughter cutting through me like glass, I placed a hand on my purse. Inside was a folder, documents that revealed the empire I had built. Deeds, contracts, and the latest agreement that had placed me among the wealthiest investors in the city. He thought he was the success story of the family. He had no idea that the real story was standing right behind him, in a faded dress, carrying millions in silence. And so, when I walked into that ballroom, I didn't walk in empty-handed. The music swelled inside the ballroom, violins mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses. My son's laughter still echoed faintly, but I no longer heard it the same way. I felt the weight of that folder in my purse, like a crown I had chosen not to wear until tonight. For a moment, I paused in the hallway outside the restrooms, my reflection staring back at me from a tall mirror. The tired dress hung from my shoulders, familiar as a second skin. I touched the faded fabric, then slowly unzipped the bag I carried. Inside was not just the folder of documents, but a carefully folded gown. A gift to myself, my very first real indulgence after years of restraint. Midnight blue, cut simply but with elegance that whispered power instead of screaming it. Alongside it lay a delicate necklace, pearls that caught the light like water droplets frozen in time. I changed quietly, each movement steady, deliberate. My worn shoes were replaced with heels that clicked with confidence against the marble floor. When I looked into the mirror again, I didn't see a woman beaten down by years of sacrifice. I saw the woman I had always been, strong, resilient, and finally ready to be seen. When I walked back into the ballroom, the air shifted. At first, no one noticed. But step by step, heads began to turn. Conversations slowed. The laughter at my expense faltered as eyes widened. The plain mother they had mocked minutes earlier was gone. In her place stood a woman draped in quiet wealth, her chin high, her presence undeniable. My gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers, not gaudy, not loud, but commanding. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who is she? Is that his mother? She looks incredible. My son's face paled, his smug smile collapsing like glass shattering on marble. He blinked once, twice, as though he couldn't trust his own eyes. His friends shifted uncomfortably, their laughter drying in their throats. And then it began. The murmurs spread further, recognition dawning. A man in the corner whispered to another, "Isn't she the investor who just bought half the Ridgeway properties?" A woman gasped softly, "She's the one who signed that deal with the city council, isn't she?" The truth poured through the room faster than wine. The strangers who had mocked me minutes before now looked at me with awe, respect, even envy. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't announce myself. I simply walked to the center of the room, each click of my heels striking like thunder in the silence. When I finally stopped, I looked straight at my son. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, he saw me not as his poor mother, not as a shadow of his success, but as the woman who held his future in her hands. The ballroom was silent, heavy with the kind of hush that follows an unexpected storm. My son stood there, his glass still raised but trembling now, his confident smirk long gone. His friends shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, their laughter evaporating into the air like smoke. He tried to recover, forcing a laugh that cracked in the middle. "Mom, this is just a misunderstanding. They were only joking. You know how it is at parties." But I didn't let him twist it into something smaller. Not this time. I stepped forward, my gown glimmering under the chandeliers, and met his eyes. A joke? My voice was calm, steady, yet sharp enough to pierce through the room. "Selling your mother's dignity for the price of your friend's approval? Was that the joke?" He swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the crowd. No one came to his defense. They were watching him now, not me, their interest turning into judgment. I took a breath, not to soften, but to steady the truth that had lived inside me for years. "I carried you in my arms when I was bone-tired. I worked double shifts so you could have shoes on your feet and food in your mouth. I pawned my grandmother's wedding ring so your tuition would be paid. Every thread of those rags you mocked tonight was stitched with sacrifice. And yet, when the time came, you treated me as though I were nothing but a shadow." His eyes grew glassy, but whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell. He reached out slightly, his voice faltering. "Mom, I didn't mean—" But I lifted a hand, stopping him. "No, you did mean it. And perhaps that's what hurts most." The crowd stayed silent, some nodding, others lowering their eyes. My words weren't loud, but they carried weight, the kind that couldn't be ignored. I turned then, ready to leave, my head high, my dignity intact. Each step echoed across the marble floor, louder in my ears than the music that had once filled the hall. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted. Just as I reached the doorway, his voice broke the stillness. "Wait!" I paused, not turning but letting him speak. His voice was raw now, stripped of arrogance. I see it now. I was blind. I thought money made me better, but I was nothing without you. Please don't leave me like this." For a moment, my heart ached. This was still the boy I once rocked to sleep, the child I shielded from storms. But the woman I had become knew the truth. Love could not survive without respect. I faced him one last time, my voice soft but unyielding. "I never left you, son. You left me the moment you chose pride over love. Remember that. And with that, I walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins of his own choices. That night, I didn't just leave a party. I left behind years of silence, of sacrifice unacknowledged. I stepped into freedom, into dignity, into the quiet triumph of knowing that wealth is not measured in money, but in the strength of one's heart.